Hello and welcome to another episode of This Much is True Crime with me, Martin Frizell, and Emeritus Professor of Criminology, David Wilson. Hi, David.
Lovely to see you again. And as you can see, the beard is starting.
It's growing.
Yeah.
It's growing.
It's coming
We're getting
back.
there. Now, listen, we're both products of the Scottish education system. And who would have thought, all those years ago when I was learning, and again, just school-based, not even university subjects, all the metaphysical poets, Canterbury Tales, Chaucer, all that sort of stuff at school, but also F. Scott Fitzgerald was someone who we studied quite well. And it's my favourite novel of all time is The Great Gatsby.
Oh, I didn't know it was your favourite novel.
Yep. And today's subject is Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah.
And it's not original, but the correlation, the similarities between J. Gatsby and Jeffrey Epstein are just too obvious to omit from this, because I'd quite like to give, if you don't mind, just a quote from F. Scott Fitzgerald to start today's
I'm sure your school are going to be
podcast.
very proud of you. You go for that quote.
Hillhead High School. Now, in his blue gardens, men and girls came and went like moths among the whisperings and the champagne and the stars. Now, this was Gatsby. This was the American dream in the Roaring Twenties.
Yeah.
This was him surrounding himself with the rich and the famous, wealth, class, materialism. But of course, it all ended. I don't want to give the story away in case you haven't read it. It all ended in tears, pretty much like Jeffrey Epstein, who some people say is a modern 21st century Gatsby. Is that going too far?
I don't think it is, to be perfectly honest. But by the way, I thought that was a great quote to start thinking about him. And I'm sure I'm going to lapse between Epstein and Epstein, so forgive me. No, I don't think it is going too far. I think he represents, to this day, a form of how to make it in America. And that's really what Fitzgerald's book was about. Can you authentically be Gatsby? And Gatsby never, that was the tension in the novel, wasn't it? Did he really belong or didn't he belong?
And he was the sad character. At the end of the day, he was the sad character.
One of my abiding thoughts about this case, though, is that all this attention focused on Epstein and, did he commit suicide? Was he killed? All the conspiracy theories that surround him has drawn attention away from what he did, which is about sexually abusing young people, kids, girls. And that attention that you talk about, Gatsby becomes the victim in the end. There's a sense in which by constantly focusing on what might have happened to Epstein, he becomes the victim as opposed to those young women that he victimized.
I mean, Gatsby was, according to one critic, it was a pathological narcissist. Epstein's been called a sociopath as well as a monster. Well, he was, let's face it, he was a monster billionaire.
Yeah.
But the danger is, I suppose, that, the romantic kind of view of Gatsby gets muddled up in just the awfulness of what Epstein was about.
Well, remember, we're talking about The Great Gatsby, but I think there's more in terms of Epstein's story, which would fit better for me with the rewriting of that book in a new iteration, which would be Bret Easton Ellis's American Psycho. I see much more in common with the central character in that with Epstein, which is about how you take the American dream and turn it into an American nightmare. And that's what my abiding takeaway from this story is about how this is the perverted, cracked mirror through which to see extraordinary wealth in American society and the power it gives to you.
And I thought it'd be interesting to hear a criminologist's view of the Epstein case, which is still rumbling on. And of course, the most latest development is the Clintons being subpoenaed separately, Hillary and Bill, to appear before a congressional committee to explain their connections with Epstein. Bill Clinton probably has got more to explain than Hillary has, although she did have a connection. But it seems to be drawing in, drip by drip, drawing in the great, the good, the infamous, not just from America, but of course from around the world. We've Prince Andrew here too. But there's so many people who are connected to Epstein And it's not going away, as Donald Trump is finding. It is not going away. But it's a story that, seems to have, so many tentacles. It's difficult just to sort of focus it down on one. But I suppose we should really start off with, from Epstein's awfulness and his crimes, just how much of a monster was he?
Oh, this is a predatory pedophile who uses his power, his influence, his wealth, his status to draw innumerable numbers of young women into his orbit, partly through Ghislaine Maxwell, and there have been developments in relation to her being moved to a low security facility just very recently. But he's quite monstrous. And it's great that you're saying you want to hear a criminologist perspective on this, because I think I would start in terms of what's currently in the zeitgeist, which was, Epstein did not commit suicide. I would start there. And when I focused down and started thinking about these issues, I looked firstly at the Metropolitan Correction Center. So that's where, for me, if I'm focusing down and trying to separate the reality, what's authentic, what's true, what's empirical, from what's now imagined either by the Republicans or the Democrats, and how Epstein becomes used by each of those parties, let's get into the actual detail that's empirical. And we start with the prison, the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Lower Manhattan, built in 1975. Supposedly going to house 474 inmates, currently housing 800 inmates. So it's overcrowded, it's understaffed. It's been described as a gulag. It's been described as a high tower dungeon. The European Court of Human Rights refused to send people that the Americans wanted in their criminal justice system. The European Court of Human Rights said, no, you can't send them there because this place is just so appalling. This is an institution where it's a federal facility. It's a federal facility for people who are remanded in custody or awaiting sentence. And that federal facility is consistently in the news in the United States because it's understaffed, overcrowded, unsanitary, and people have difficulty when they're in prison there. And what I looked at immediately to kind of focus down on what might have happened to Epstein, I tried to see how many people had committed suicide in that facility in the years preceding Epstein's suicide. And I came up with the figure that there had been something like a number of suicide attempts. There were something like 18 suicide attempts in the 3 years prior to Epstein committing suicide, but only one suicide in itself. But remember, this is an institution where lots of people are remanded in custody and are going to be transferred out of that facility to somewhere else. But it was so bad, Martin, that the federal government was offering correctional officers in other facilities a £10,000 inducement to come and work there. They found it so difficult to get staff. So when we're focusing down and looking criminologically at things, that's the place I would start, the facility itself and what its reputation was like.
Epstein was there waiting on sex trafficking charges. So they finally got him. He had been in jail before. He'd served 13 months in a local prison in Florida before. But reading into it in 2008, those 13 months, he was in an empty wing of this Palm Beach County jail. He was allowed out 6 days a week for up to 16 hours at a time to go to his office.
Yeah.
And that was a plea deal that he'd done. And he then finds himself the focus of federal charges, which gets him the sex trafficking in this awful jail you're painting the picture of as such. But what he's not able to do, or is he able to use any of his contacts, any of his rich and famous and powerful contacts, to make life easier for him? Or is there a way out for Jeffrey Epstein? Or do those rich and powerful contacts want him gone. So, I mean, this is clearly the conspiracy that comes in here. So did he commit suicide, or was he murdered in jail to keep him silent?
And I've got absolutely no doubt. So I can nail my colours to the mast. And I've looked at this as a former prison governor, as somebody who knows about the circumstances in which people will take their own lives in custody. And I've looked specifically at what was happening to Epstein. And I've read the various independent governmental reports that have been written about what happens, about the days leading up to Epstein's death, that I've got no doubt that he committed suicide. So, but your other questions were relating to, does he have a way of influencing what's happening to him when he's in the Metropolitan Correctional Centre, the MCC? So he goes there, and I've got the dates somewhere. He goes there in 7th of July. On the 7th of July, 2019, he's moved from the plusher conditions that you were describing once he's arrested and waiting to go to trial. He goes there on the 7th of July, and he's immediately transferred not from general location, but onto the SHU, the Special Housing Unit. So that to me seems like an appropriate decision for the warden of the MCC to have made. He's high profile. He's going to be a target. He's a sex offender, or he's alleged to have committed sexual offenses. So he will be a target to other inmates. So if I was that warden, as governors are known in the United States, I would certainly have moved him to a facility where there could be greater scrutiny of what's happening to him, to make sure that he doesn't commit suicide, or indeed isn't attacked by other people.
Well, he's meant to be checked every half hour.
Meant to be checked every hour.
Day and night.
Day and night. Now, he's also got a cellmate in the SHU because there's overcrowding in that facility. And then if we fast forward from the 7th of July, when he's first moved to the SHU, has a cellmate, then there's an incident on the 29th of July. So on the 29th of July, his cellmate raises the alarm to say he's just tried to commit suicide. Guards come in to the cell in the SHU, and they find Epstein with some a towel around his neck. And it's quite clear that he has attempted, that's on the 23rd of July, beg your pardon. It's quite clear that he has attempted to take his own life. He's strung himself up from the top bunk and kneeled down, which would be a classic way of hanging oneself, because there isn't enough room to hang yourself from the ceiling, for example. Now, there is some confusion here, because he's obviously placed thereafter on suicide watch. There's some claim that the cellmate, in fact, Epstein claims that the cellmate tried to kill him. He then retracts that confession, saying that, no, the cellmate didn't try and kill me. But the psychology unit within the SHU send an email saying, you need to get a different cellmate for Epstein, given what has been alleged when he first recovered from this suicide attempt. So even before we get to the 9th of August, 9th, 10th of August, there has been a previous suicide attempt, although there is some confusion as to whether that was a cellmate trying to kill him, or indeed the cellmate alerting other people to the fact that Epstein was trying to take his own life.
But on the day that he did commit suicide, there was no cellmate.
No. So he is given a new cellmate as per the instructions from the psychologist working at the SHU. A new cellmate is given to him, and that seems to settle him down. But that cellmate, remember, this is a facility that deals with people who are awaiting sentence or awaiting trial or awaiting transfer after they've been sentenced. That cellmate gets transferred out on the 8th of August. So you're absolutely right on the crucial dates, the 8th, 9th August, he is by himself. A new cellmate had been assigned to him, but that person hadn't yet gone into the cell that Epstein was located within. Now, the other key things there that I don't know if you're aware, I don't know if other people are aware, you've got to read the report that was done on this. Epstein had met with his lawyers on the 8th of August, and he'd written his last will. He'd written his last will and testament. So he'd actually, on the 8th of August...
Is that an unusual thing to do?
A very unusual thing to do. And for me, as if I knew that information, I would be very concerned that an inmate felt that they had to do that, because that would raise all kinds of red flags for me.
Or you could have thought that maybe I'm going to get targeted, maybe someone's going to try and bump me off in jail. And so I better, for lots of reasons, I should maybe, make sure my will is in order.
Well, that might also be true. But for me, it's very significant that he meets with them. The lawyers have subsequently said they didn't pick up anything that was of concern to them on the 8th of August when that had been done. But the other thing that emerged from the report, the Office for the Inspector General of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, the other thing that emerged from his report, and here's where his money comes in, he was quite clearly able to corrupt some of the staff in the SHU, because he was given, on that day, after he signs his last will and testament, he is given an unrecorded and an uncensored telephone call, which he said was to his mother. Now, seemingly that it wasn't to his mother, it was to someone else. But he's given, so that gives you an indication that he's able to bribe some of the guards to get to do whatever it is that he wants to do. And also we know, again, at the 8th and 9th of August, 2,000 documents related to Ghislaine Maxwell are released into the public domain. Now, put all that together, Mark.
That's exactly where the conspiracy comes in, though, isn't it?
Well, why? You've suddenly got a man who's writing his last will. He is without a cellmate. He's able to corrupt the guards enough that they give him an unrecorded phone call. And there's this drip, drip, drip feed of documents about his reputation. He has no cellmate, and he has therefore the time and the inclination, having tried before, to take his own life.
But also, as we said at the start of it, he is someone who quite a few people, would quite like silenced, because if he does get to stand trial, what comes out of his mouth, what's in his black book, what's in his stories implicating people from popes to royals to prime ministers to presidents.
Well, when that conspiracy theory obviously started, it was Donald Trump that was saying, we should find out what's in the Epstein files. What's he said? This was obviously an attempt to implicate the Clintons, from what I can read initially. They felt there was going to be muck on the Clintons. But now, because Donald Trump said during the election campaign that he wins, that he was going to make sure the Epstein files were released, he's now backtracked on that, saying there's nothing to see here, move away. Whereas, in fact, Republicans are now saying, oh, no, Democrats are now saying we want the Epstein files released because we think there are things in relation to Donald Trump. And indeed, the Washington Post has published information. So both the Democrats and the Republicans now seem to want as much information on Epstein as possible. And that may very well happen. But it comes back to the conspiracy theory isn't just about what's in the files, but the fact that there was a conspiracy to kill him so that he couldn't give any evidence about what might be in the files, what might be hidden in the files, or what might be augmented from things that have been written in the files. And I just don't buy that he was murdered. You're going to bring up the CCTV now, aren't you?
And they also say, and this is where I'm very interested, just from a television perspective, is that after midnight, which is when the missing minute is, just before midnight, the clock jumps very quickly to after midnight. It picks up again. It's a different aspect ratio, which is a different kind of size of frame on the tape. So CBS, and they've spoken to many experts who, have looked at this tape, they believe the tape that was issued to the public, to the press, is not the original tape. They believe it's an edited version of the tape. Now, why would the tape have been edited? And why are they not admitting it's edited for it's a screen grab or whatever it is? And of course, that's where the conspiracy comes in, is that in that minute or in that short period, someone did something to Epstein that made it look like suicide.
Okay. Now, I can't, and I wouldn't remotely want to, that's your side of the pod, isn't it? You're very skilled about camera ratios and aspects and all that kind of stuff. I also note, though, go back to the very first things I said about MCC. This is a failing organization. This is an overcrowded, understaffed institution. And when you read the Office of the Inspector General report, he talks about the fact that the cameras rarely work in that facility. He talks about the fact that, that it's regular that the cameras are not working as they should be working. So that would be the first thing I would say. But that's not my side of the pod. I then just thought, as a criminologist, okay, a minute is missing. And then that seemed to, I then looked for the medical examiner's report about Epstein, okay? What did the medical examiner actually say were his injuries? And there are two things here. Firstly, if he was murdered, I'd have expected to see some defensive wounds, that he was grabbing at the noose, he was fighting back, that there would be evidence of his fingernails being broken, there would be bruising perhaps as well. So all of those things I would have expected to have seen if there was something controversial that happened there. But more importantly, every speculation I've seen about him being murdered in that missing minute, okay? And I'm like, do people really believe that you can be strangled in a minute? And of course they do, because they watch television programs, dramas in which the killer kills by strangling somebody in a minute, under a minute, in seconds. Whereas in fact, you can lose consciousness if you're being strangled after about 30 seconds. But to actually die as a result of manual or other forms of strangulation, it would take about 4 minutes, 5 minutes before you were dead. And therefore, the missing minute of tape doesn't seem to me to have the significance that many people have put on it, simply because it would have taken much longer if they were trying to kill Epstein for him to have died than the minute of missing tape.
And we can't rely on the prison guards who are meant to be checking on him every half hour, because they were caught sleeping on the tape.
And worse, they then falsified the registers to imply that they had checked on him, which they hadn't. And as far as I'm aware, they have been sacked. And indeed, as far as I'm aware, the warden of the MCC has been moved to another facility and replaced by someone else. So, look, this is a failing institution which has had multiple problems for a long period of time. And the only thing that's really surprising about what happens to Epstein is why other prisoners in that facility haven't taken their own lives in the past. And I put that down to the fact that they aren't necessarily there for any great length of time, because they're either released at court or they're transferred to somewhere else.
So carrying the can falls to Ghislaine Maxwell for it then, basically. And she spends a bit of time in a really unpleasant prison, but all of a sudden she's interviewed by the Justice Department, Victor, and she's moved to a low risk, low category, fairly nice jail, it seems to be. Is she, or should she, more to the point, be worried about her safety?
Oh, I don't think she should be worried about her safety.
Because she knows?
Because she knows. She's got information that's very relevant to whatever it is that either the Republicans or the Democrats want to know more about. And it's quite clear that in return for what she has said and is willing to say further, she will be given access to privileges that other prisoners won't have. And of course, she's going to be, even if she's in a low risk prison environment, there are still risks. It might be low risk, but there are still risks. But you can bet your bottom dollar that she is being looked after very carefully by guards in that correctional facility.
But what I'm alluding to here is that, I mean, at the base of all of this is the suggestion that there's this dark, mysterious, underground cabal of rich, famous, powerful people who have their wanton way, awful way, with young women, with girls, with children. And who are the gatekeepers to this? It was Epstein, and it was Ghislaine Maxwell, who was almost the enabler for it.
Well, that's true.
So yes, exactly. But if she's keeping the secrets of who, what, when, where, why, is she not a target for that powerful cabal to silence?
Probably.
That's the threat to her. I don't think from other inmates, but I'm saying they've got influence. They can pay off. They can hit people, surely against the conspiracy here, but they could silence her if they wanted to, or they could get to her.
Oh, and they'll get to her through other inmates. That's why it's important that she's guarded from other inmates. But yeah, she's vulnerable, it seems to me, in that respect. However, what you have to go back to separate out the truth and those things which are conspiracy is, remember, it does seem to me that there are powerful, rich, influential people who were quite clearly caught up in Epstein's world, and being caught up in that world allowed them to behave abysmally sexually with young women. Now, the conspiracy becomes things that we have heard before, does it not? And it's called QAnon. And if you remember, QAnon was all about there being a pizza restaurant in Washington where there was a democratic cabal of rich and powerful people who were sexually abusing children in that restaurant. And indeed, a man went to that restaurant armed with a rifle and to break down the doors to find out where those children were. So remember, we've got some of the conspiracy stuff, which we should ignore, but some of the reality, the authentic stuff, which is that there were children abused by Epstein, and that those children were procured by Ghislaine Maxwell. So the key thing for me is, let's separate out those things which are conspiracy theory, and let's keep talking about the reality and the authentic misuse of their power and influence and money to procure young women.
In terms of what she was found guilty of, and talk of Donald Trump not ruling out, possibly considering a pardon, how would that stick in your craw?
Well, it would stick in my craw. So I don't think that she should be pardoned. I don't see her as a victim of Epstein. I think that she was very willing, a very willing accomplice. But remember, he's pardoned quite a few people. All the people who invaded the January the 6th. So he's pardoned a few people, so it's not impossible. And he clearly knew Ghislaine Maxwell. And Ghislaine Maxwell is being very well defended and has kept her head low, and is clearly in conversation with the Department of Justice. So she becomes a useful conduit to try and dampen down a lot of the conspiracy theory speculation that would be of benefit, I think, most of all to Donald Trump. But no, she shouldn't be pardoned. And I think who gets lost in all of this process are all the young women who were sexually abused. And I suppose, I heard people say recently that, they knew Ghislaine Maxwell in New York. And I met her once in New York, and she was, perfectly nice. But perfectly nice people can do abominable things, and they should be punished for those abominable things.
And she's been subpoenaed along with the Clintons to appear before this congressional committee, and that's October when this seems to be happening. There is no end to it, is there?
It doesn't seem to be, because there's never an end to a conspiracy theory, and people will react to the kinds of things that.
But it's not just but the Clintons is not just conspiracy theory. I mean, he or his people have admitted that he knew Epstein very well. He travelled on Epstein's Lolita Express, the jet. Hillary Clinton, I think they've accepted that Ghislaine Maxwell got her nephew onto Hillary Clinton's campaign. So there's that involvement. And so it's just, how deep does it go? I mean, Bill Clinton, as we know from his past misdemeanors, especially with Monica Lewinsky, has previous, not suggesting for a second that anything's happened with underage girls or children as such. But there will be questions. It's going to be very unpleasant. And I think their lawyers are probably trying to fight the subpoena. But I think if they do that, they're up against contempt of court. And I'm not sure they want to go down that route. But the next few weeks are going to be fascinating in this.
Oh, and no matter what, it will run and run and run. I mean, what's the meme? There's an Epstein meme at the moment, which is EDKH. Epstein did not kill himself. When you've got to a position where you're even a meme, which is repeating the phrase that he doesn't kill himself, that he was murdered, and he was murdered so as to keep him silent. And when that meme is used by both Republicans and Democrats, and remember the latest session of the House of Representatives was ended a day early to prevent more information being released. So both the Democrats and the Republicans have it in their interests to say, oh no, nothing to see on our side. There's something to see on the other side. So that simply keeps this in the public domain. And you kind of pushed me, and I thought I hadn't really thought about that. But yeah, I would have thought Ghislaine Maxwell is vulnerable at the moment.
And you add in the current president is implicated to a degree as well, because he knew and was very friendly with Epstein. And you just wonder, at what point do they come knocking on Donald Trump's door and try and dig more?
Well, I don't think they will whilst he's president, is my view. We are dealing...
Elon Musk is determined.
Oh,
some people it's personal, isn't it? But he's determined there's something, he believes he knows there's something there.
Well, he said he knew something was there, didn't he? But he kind of backtracked from that when Trump started to threaten his commercial interests. But I don't think we'll see any knocking on Trump's door whilst he's president. Look at what he's just done in Washington, D.C., for heaven's sakes. He's just, he's got the National Guard taking over control of policing in Washington.
Yeah, and the conspiracy theorists, Professor, are suggesting, whether it's Washington, D.C., or whether it's Alaska and President Putin, they're all diversions from having to deal with Epstein head on.
And I think that's true. I think there are diversions, but I think it's also consistent with what Trump is doing with the second presidency, which is it's authoritarian, it's nativist. He has the National Guard take over cities like Washington, D.C. or Los Angeles, because those are seen as being multicultural and therefore not part of the nativist right-wing agenda that Trump espouses. So these are both consistent with what he believes in ideologically, but it's also a diversionary tactic without any shadow of a doubt. It's also about, don't look here, you don't need to look here. But the Washington Post has already produced enough evidence to show that they were hand and glove in terms of their friendship. My gosh, the First Lady has just threatened to sue Hunter Biden, who made an allegation that it was Epstein that introduced the First Lady to Donald Trump. she's pushed back on that and is going to, her lawyers are saying, if you don't detract what you said, we will sue you because that's not true. So this is going to run and run and run. And it's the psychodrama of American politics. It's the psychodrama of American democracy at the moment that is the most distressing to me. We want a strong, viable, democratic United States of America. And at the moment, well, we're just not getting that.
80 million of them voted for him. Let's not forget that. Let's round it off just by, you do wonder either in his plush, apparently the biggest, house in Manhattan, or his home in New Mexico, or, Jeff's Island in the Caribbean, where they would all go and drink champagne and have their way with young women. Did they ever think it was all going to end this way? A bit like the Gatsby. And I just love this quote again. In his blue gardens, men and girls came and went like moths among the whisperings and the champagne and the stars, and how it all fell apart. The American dream in tatters.
You've got to, come on, you've got to mention who taught you English at school?
Mr. Hamilton.
So that's from Mr. Hamilton. That's in memory of Mr. Hamilton. What school did you go to? I forget.
Hillhead High School.
Hillhead High School.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Hamilton at Hillhead High. Well done.
It's great. But it's down to F. Scott Fitzgerald. And it is, he could see, even then in the Roaring Twenties, he could see, and so it's nothing new. Epstein's nothing new. He's just a creature. He's a monster of our times.
And don't imagine that child sexual abuse is something that's new. Don't imagine that it's just simply been invented by people like Epstein. Child sexual abuse has been ongoing for centuries. And it's only now that we've been able to really acknowledge the extent of child sexual abuse. And that's what gets ignored in the Epstein story. Who really is a victim and what we really need to do about preventing more of those victims happening today and happening tomorrow.
Well, as I said, it's got legs and legs, this one. So this is probably part one, because no doubt come October, and if they do, and I'm sure they probably will have to go before Congress, there'll be a lot more stuff coming out that we can talk about on Epstein, the Clintons, and Maxwell. For the time being, Professor, thank you very much.
You're welcome.